don't understand what the hell is going on with you.
You guys don't work, you don't go to school, you don't do anything. All you do is lay around and drive your cars. You know how that makes me feel?
Mad. Y'all want to go to a party?
Sure.
Welcome to the party.
I got a new boyfriend, Mom.
What kind?
A hug.
You might as well get high.
Oh, baby, you know what I like.
Bobby and I have been friends since we were like almost born.
Raped Allie. Treats everyone like shit.
So what are you gonna do, Lisa?
He's the source of everybody's troubles.
Are we really gonna do this?
This guy deserves to die. Dead! 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 Turn those goddamn lights off!
Is he dead yet?
Getting there.
Mom, what if you witnessed a crime like a murder?
What are you kids up to, Allie?
We killed Bobby.
You murdered Bobby Kent?
I wouldn't even say they murdered him. I mean, he was fighting back.
Hello.
I'm Lauren.
I am Ken.
And this is Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
Paradise After Dark is an independent podcast covering true crime,
unsolved mysteries,
missing people,
urban legends, and the dark side of the Sunshine State.
If you'd like to support our show and get a bunch of extra Paradise After Dark content, plus early and ad-free episodes, sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/Paradise After Dark podcast.
And be sure to visit our website at paradiseafterdark.com.
On our website, you'll find links to all of our episodes, our mailing list, our social medias, and our Patreon.
We also have a virtual tip jar. And leave us a tip, we'll give you a shout out on the show.
Speaking of shout outs, we want to welcome Chrissy to our Patreon.
Welcome to the family.
She's our latest Patreon, signed up.
Thank you, Chrissy.
So,
we appreciate it.
Welcome. And Ken, what are we discussing this week?
We're discussing a case that we have actually kind of brought up. We kind of just grazed over in an earlier episode titled Swamp Bodies. And we didn't really get into detail because we kind of knew that case was going to come up eventually. This case tonight, and you guys will probably see, and if you've heard of this case, you understand why there's going to be some frustration coming out here or there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just that kind of case. So
we're going to be discussing the murder of Bobby Kent in Hollywood, Florida. So Hollywood, Florida is a typical suburban town outside of Fort Lauderdale. But in the summer of 1993, Hollywood, Florida felt more like a Hollywood movie or possibly a horror movie. 20-year-old Bobby Kent was born May 12, 1973, to Fred and Farah Kent, both Iranian immigrants. He attended South Broward High School in the South Florida suburb of Hollywood. According to Tim Donnelly, who prosecuted all the conspirators for this murder, Bobby Kent was, quote, like Eddie Haskell.
You look very nice tonight, Mrs. Cleaver.
All of the parents loved him in the neighborhood, but the kids looked at him in a different way.
Because they actually knew him.
Bobby Kent was, by many accounts, a popular athletic boy. He earned decent grades in school, and his parents had high aspirations for him. Fred was a self-employed stockbroker and had plans to set his son up running his own business once he graduated from college. Bobby Kent was an avid car stereo enthusiast and had his own vehicle sound system that was worth several $1,000s, and told his father that's the type of business he'd want to get into.
So basically like a car audio business?
Car stereo type of business. That was the plan. Well, Marty Puccio was Bobby's best friend. And I don't think that the word frenemy was around back then, but I think that could be the best way to describe this friendship.
I would agree with that for sure.
Frenemy.
Well, let's talk about Marty Puccio. This is Bobby Kent's childhood best friend. They've been best friends
since 3rd grade, I believe.
Exactly. So for a long time. Now, Marty Puccio was born March 21st, 1973 in Brooklyn, New York, but he was raised in Hollywood, Florida. Now, Bobby Kent and Marty Puccio had known each other, like Lauren said, since 3rd grade, and had lived in the same block in Hollywood in Broward County, and were good friends as teenagers and young adults. So they remained friends for quite some time.
They were friends for most of their life, yeah.
Exactly. Well, frenemies, as Lauren's going to call them. Well, bad blood, however, existed between the two of them, and kind of has always existed. It's kind of been there, but it progressed as we go along.
It got worse.
Puccio felt ill will and hatred towards Kent, who would bully and pummel him. Marty's parents would recall the young boy coming home after spending time with Bobby, covered in bruises and at times bleeding. Now, the Puccios believed this was some form of roughhousing and encouraged their son to cut off contact with Bobby, or at least limit it, but apparently did not take any other kind of action. However, what was passed off as roughhousing that got out of hand was later revealed to be physical abuse. For some reason, Puccio was unable to break ties with his abusive friend Bobby.
So Bobby was abusive towards Marty, even going back to childhood.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they were. I mean, there's some stories where they had some really aggressive times.
Okay.
So he would randomly hit him and wrestle him,
punch him,
exactly,
stuff like that.
Well, basically, bully him. I mean, I can imagine the fear that he had as a young child that your best friend is doing this, but yet you're not sure because you're still young yet of how to handle the situation.
Okay.
So this love-hate relationship with Bobby, both being playful and punishing towards Marty, continued all the way up until adolescence. Now, the bullying became so bad at one point that Marty begged his parents to move away from Hollywood so that he might escape. His parents refused, leading their son to live temporarily with relatives in New York. And before long, though, Marty returned to Florida and back into his cruel relationship with Bobby. He seemed unable to break away or break any ties from this abusive connection that he had with Bobby. He just could not get away from it.
That's strange. Well, Bobby Kent's parents weren't very pleased with the friendship either. Fred Kent thought of Marty Puccio as a wayward slacker who had no future, and he felt that his friendship with his son, Bobby, would destroy the future he was helping Bobby build. In the 11th grade, Marty dropped out of school. This added to the list of grievances Fred and Farrah Kent had against him, as they ironically believed that Marty was a bad influence on their son and wished to stifle the friendship.
So he didn't necessarily care for Marty, even though he didn't really know the underlying issues, what their friendship was based on.
Yeah, that his son was actually the bully.
Didn't they work together at a grocery store or something?
I don't know.
I think it was a grocery store they both worked at, I think.
Maybe.
I'm not 100% certain on that. Don't quote me on that.
So both boys spent a lot of time at the gym and were rumored to use steroids, which in Bobby's case, according to testimonial accounts, significantly contributed to his erratic and aggressive behavior.
I've never done steroids, so it's hard for me to imagine what that can do, but I suppose it can have a mental effect.
Does. Yes.
Because you get so much adrenaline or pumped. I don't know. I'm not a steroid user, but I can see where it would definitely make you more aggressive. Well, then there's this aspect. This aspect of their friendship between Marty and Bobby is a little off because they were also involved in gay prostitution, this subculture that was rampant in South Florida at the time. To what degree is largely unknown, but it's speculated that Kent was pimping out Puccio at clubs.
Now, wasn't there a club? What was it called in the area?
I believe it was called Copa.
Well, okay.
And what they would do is Bobby actually forced Marty to get on stage and dance
At this club.
at the club. So he would have to get up there, strip down, and dance. And I guess there was a lot of straight men who would go and dance at this club because apparently the gay patrons of this club would tip them money. The problem with Marty and Bobby was that
Marty didn't want to dance.
Marty didn't want to do it. Bobby forced him to do it, but then Bobby would take half the money. So he even tried to quit a couple times. I think Bobby beat the shit out of him. So he didn't want him to quit. Also, to get a little more involved, Kent and Puccio had experimented with making gay porn movies. Now, they hoped to distribute these to local shops. Neither Kent nor Puccio actually participated in these movies, but rather there was a 40-year-old man that they met at the gym that they went to, the YMCA, who they basically got to perform sex acts in these gay movies, these gay videos.
But it wasn't actually like sex acts. They just had this guy who would like masturbate and play with sex toys.
Yeah, well, apparently, allegedly, they directed these movies, but they did coax this man to masturbate on the film and play with sex toys. Kent tried to peddle a movie titled Rough Boys to porn shops across South Florida, but none of the porn shops took him up on his offer due to the poor audio and video quality, as well as a lack of any sexual activities in the film beyond a man dancing nude and playing with a dildo.
So, okay, just to try and catch up here. So we have Marty Puccio and Bobby Kent and their friends, and we have physical abuse, and it seems like there's actually like some what can be classified as sexual abuse here.
To some extent, yeah. I mean, if he's forcing him to do porn on stage and split the money, I guess that to some extent that is.
Yeah. So there's no two ways around it. Bobby Kent and Marty Puccio were in some sort of odd abusive relationship / friendship, and Bobby Kent was the aggressor and Marty Puccio was the one being abused.
Yeah, there was some discussion that I read about where Bobby had a Doberman Pinscher, and that he would actually force Marty to wrestle with him so the dog would start to bite Marty, even though Marty hated it. And then eventually Marty got in there one day and got bit really bad and literally got cut, started bleeding, and Bobby just sat there laughing, thought it was funny. So, I mean, this is the kind of person that we're dealing with. But the problem is Marty wasn't really being aggressive back, so therefore...
But he didn't have the balls to like walk away.
Exactly.
Or fight back.
Yeah, there's numerous occasions where if you look into this case, you'll see where Bobby was pretty aggressive with him. I mean, they were hitting each other, and he was pretty nasty with him.
Okay. Well, toward the beginning of 1993, Marty, who was 20 at the time, began dating Lisa Connolly, aged 18. Now, Lisa Connolly was getting fed up pretty quickly with Marty spending so much time with Bobby and the way that Bobby treated Marty. Lisa Connolly tried to distract Bobby away from Marty by setting Bobby up with her friend, Alice, aka Allie Willis. Now, Allie Willis was only 17 at the time and had a baby of her own, which her parents mostly cared for. And according to the Sun Sentinel, Bobby Kent was abusive toward Allie and engaged in impulsive and bizarre sexual behavior, forcing her to watch the homosexual pornography that he and Marty had made and slapping her face when she looked away.
Wow.
So Kent and Willis, Bobby and Allie, dated for a few weeks, and then Allie moved back with her parents in Palm Bay, Florida, and broke up with Bobby. Bobby said when she broke up with him, he threatened to murder her and smother her baby unless she returned to Hollywood to date him. At some point during this time, Lisa became pregnant with Marty's baby and was determined to pursue a permanent relationship with Marty.
Well, it appears as if Lisa Connolly was the one that really instigated this murder. I mean, Connolly decided that Bobby Kent needed to be eliminated permanently and began talking to Marty and several other friends about murdering him.
So Lisa Connolly was sort of like obsessed with Marty. Like he was her, like, she was pregnant with his baby. They were dating.
Well, they started dating, and she really hit it off because,
she really wanted him all to herself.
Well, she had grown up, and she was a little bit overweight, so she was constantly battling some of that. You know, she didn't really care. You know, didn't really love herself. I mean, one of the reasons that she really hated Bobby so much is he used to call her Shamu. He called her Shamu because she was a little overweight, so she was self-conscious about it. And she meets Marty, who falls in love with her. And Marty's this physically fit guy. He goes to the gym. I mean, to the point where apparently when he was dancing in those nightclubs, a lot of the gay men really liked him because he was an attractive guy. He was very physically fit. And so when Lisa gets a hold of this guy, she wants to keep this guy. She doesn't want him going anywhere because he really loves her. She loves him. And
she wants him all to herself.
Exactly. So what she does is she convinces Marty turn against his best friend,
Bobby,
aka abuser, aka Bobby. And she kind of wanted to get revenge for the treatment of her friend Allie Willis. Remember, they dated, and she endured all this bullshit from Bobby as well. So she wants to kind of get back at Bobby because of some stuff that people she cares about really had to go through.
Well, on July 13th of 1993, Allie Willis went to Lisa's house and brought two friends. Well, her current boyfriend, Donald Semenek, age 17, and Heather Swallers, age 18. Later that night, the group stole a gun from Lisa's mother and lured Bobby Kent to a rock pit in West Broward County, but backed out at the last minute. See, now the plan was for Allie Willis to seduce Kent and begin having sex with him. And while this was happening, Lisa was supposed to sneak up behind him and shoot Bobby. Now, Puccio, Semenek, and Swallers became uncomfortable and left, leaving Allie and Lisa alone to go through with this plan. But then Lisa was unable to go through with the shooting, allegedly later saying that she did not shoot Bobby because the police can trace bullet fragments and the gun originally came from her mother.
Yeah, so they'd be able to track it. Obviously, the ballistics, they could come back. In other words, they could find out who killed Bobby.
Right. So, but later that same night, Bobby and Allie were seen holding hands. But then, according to Allie Willis, that night, Bobby Kent raped her.
Yeah, she had to begin some of the sex act because that was sort of the plan.
Right.
Now, keep in mind now.
So it's a little confusing, and I don't think that anybody really knows the truth about what exactly went down.
Well, the part that really concerns me is to keep this in mind is Allie is going there with Bobby to have sex with him, but keep in mind Lauren had mentioned Donald Semenek, who is Allie's current boyfriend.
Yeah.
So he's there. So he knows what's going on, and he's seeing what's happening. Well, despite all of this going on and everything happening and what transpired that evening, and despite the failed attempt, the group decides, particularly Lisa Connolly, that they still wanted Kent dead. So now they still want to get rid of Bobby and eliminate Bobby. So the next evening, which is July 14th of 1993, Connolly, Puccio, Willis, Donald Semenek, and Lisa's cousin, his name is Derek Dvorko, began planning Bobby Kent's demise while they were sitting at a Fort Lauderdale Pizza Hut.
And Heather Swallers.
Oh, that's right. Heather Swallers was there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think Heather Swallers, the reason I don't really put much emphasis on her is I don't think she was much of a willing participant. She was, I guess, known to be a bit of a crackhead, if you will. She had gotten into crack. She was a pretty big drug addict. So I think she was there because drugs were available at this group. So I don't think
she was just kind of like along for the ride.
Exactly. I know that she does play a part in it, but that's kind of why I forgot about her, because she's not really a huge part of this, even though she does go to court. In the Fort Lauderdale's Pizza Hut, they get this meeting going, and Connolly ends up contacting this self-proclaimed hitman, and his name is Derek Kaufman. He's kind of the big guy in this, right? Now, prior to meeting this group, Kaufman had no association with Kent or Puccio or even any other member of this entire group. It's actually unknown how Lisa knew of him or how to contact him. Maybe he's a drug dealer or something. Maybe she knew him or knew him somehow.
Well, he was supposedly some sort of mob hitman, which he really wasn't at all.
Well, he was known to hang out with a lot of younger kids because I think they were very impressionable, so he could act like the big guy.
Yeah.
While the little kids were
but
like,
I think
ooh.
he told all these big stories that he was a hitman and blah, blah, blah. But in reality, he really wasn't at all.
Exactly. So somehow Lisa knows this guy. So she goes and asks him for a gun, but Kaufman tells her that he can't procure a weapon that quickly. I mean, I can't get you a gun that fast in a couple of days. I'm a hitman. It's going to take me some time, which kind of leads me to believe that maybe he wasn't the hitman. But
no, I don't think so.
I do miss Pizza Hut, though.
Do we have a Pizza Hut even?
Not that we can walk into and sit down. No.
Matter
of fact, there's the two that we've gone to before. You can't even sit inside because of COVID.
So late on the night of July 14th, the 7 individuals joined together at Puccio's house to finalize their plans. Marty contacted Bobby and convinced him to come out with the group that night, with the promise that they would race their cars and that Allie Willis, wanted to have sex with him again. So the group assembled their weapons. Between them, they had 2 knives, a lead pipe, and a baseball bat. That night, despite blistering Florida summer heat and humidity, Marty was dressed in black jeans and a black trench coat with a red bandana tied around his head. And according to Allie Willis, he came out of his house looking like Rambo.
So I think he was ready at this point.
Yeah.
So around 11:30 p.m., they picked up Bobby from his home and they headed to the rock pit in this undeveloped area in western Broward County, Florida. And this, at the time, it's kind of in the early stages of it's a developed subdivision, and it's now known as the neighborhood of Weston. So you would know Western Florida, which is Pembroke. Was it Pembroke Pines or is that Weston?
It's Weston.
Weston, because it's in that same vicinity.
Yeah.
So it's kind of all in the same area, but this is a whole new subdivision that they're building.
So they're all together. They pick Bobby up. Semenuk went by the pseudonym Alex and posed as the boyfriend of Heather Swallers.
Okay, so now he's not. So now we're going back again, but he's already pretending to be Heather's boyfriend.
Right, because they're with Allie, and Allie is supposed to be wanting to have sex with Marty. But he's actually Allie's boyfriend.
Okay, because I know on the way that he sat there and he had some conversation with Bobby about rap music, weightlifting, and this is all on the way to this subdivision, Weston, basically the murder scene. So sometime around midnight, Willis acted as bait. So Allie's going to go out there and she's going to lead Kent into this trap. Because now they've got the plan put together.
Right.
The Pizza Hut plan.
The Pizza Hut plan.
Is all put together. So Willis led Kent away from the group down by a canal that ran up against the area. So in Florida, there's canals everywhere. So if you hit the end of a road, there's a canal somewhere. So Heather Swallers then was instructed by Derek Kaufman, the hitman, to join them and figure out if Kent suspected anything. If she felt he didn't, then Kaufman told her to ask Kent if there were any alligators in this canal. So she's supposed to go down there and say, hey, is there any alligators in this canal?
So that was like the signal.
That was the signal of, hey, that's their go word. So once she did that, the murder is going to go ahead and happen. So the murder is going to commence on her word once she says, are there alligators in the canal? But when Swallers asked Kent if the canal had alligators, Kent sarcastically told her she should go skinny dipping and find out herself. And almost immediately after this transpires, Donnie Semenuk, a.k.a. Alex, a.k.a. Heather's pretend boyfriend, he charged after Bobby and stabbed him from behind in his neck. And Kent swirls around and called out to Puccio for help. So he's calling for Marty, which you just got stabbed in the neck. You turn around, you're with a bunch of people who you don't really know, so you're going to call out for your best friend. So Bobby has been stabbed in the back of the neck, and he's freaking out, so he's calling for Marty. Hey, Marty, help me. Help me. So Marty comes running up and then stabbed him in the abdomen. When Bobby tried to flee, Semenuk, Kaufman, and Puccio, they tackle him. And then they stab him, and then they start to beat on him. And you can just imagine how brutal this had to be, because this is the whole plan's starting to come together. So once it happens, adrenaline's
It's
flowing.
like a frenzy.
And everything is happening. So several times during this murder, Bobby Kent is begging Puccio, hey, for mercy. I mean, it's like, hey, help me. He's begging for mercy. Telling his friend, I'm sorry, Marty. Whatever I did, I'm sorry. Puccio just continues stabbing him. So while Kent was down, Puccio decides he's going to cut his throat and hit his head against the ground so hard that he actually fractured a vertebrae in Kent's neck. Now, Kaufman, he comes up, remember Kaufman, the hitman, he comes up with the final blow and takes this 27-ounce aluminum baseball bat and crashes him right in the head. At this point now, 20-year-old Bobby Kent is dead. And Kent's body was then drug over and dumped in the canal. However, there are some conflicting reports over who did what. Either it was Kaufman and Derek Dvorko or Kaufman and Marty Puccio. It's still...
That dumped the body.
Exactly, they dumped the body. It's still conflicting, though. They tossed the baseball bat and the knives into the ocean, which they were never found. I think they found the baseball bat. The knives were never found. And they decided that they would all agree that they had all been together, hanging out on the night of the murder, while Bobby had been out on a date with an unidentified woman.
So that was their alibi.
Exactly. So that we're all together, but Bobby's not here. He's out with somebody we don't know. Because we do know that he didn't tell his parents who he was leaving with.
Right.
So they do have that going for him at this point. But then, of course, obviously Bobby's dead.
Well, Bobby's family reported him missing when he didn't return home that evening. Marty Puccio, as Bobby's best friend, was contacted by the police about Bobby's possible whereabouts. Marty feigned ignorance about where Bobby might be and professed to be worried about his friend. But the cops may have had a gut feeling that something wasn't right, but they had nothing to go on when it came to Marty.
Well, yeah, you find out you're his best friend for life, and you don't know where he's at.
So in the days following the crime, many of the conspirators confessed to various other people.
That's odd.
Lisa Connolly confessed to her mother, who contacted her sister, who's Derek Dvorko's mother. Remember that Lisa and Derek were cousins.
Yeah.
Together, they took Lisa and Derek to see their brother, Joe Scrima, who had friends in the police department and who they thought would know what to do. So Scrima's friends put them in touch with Detective Frank Ilaraza of the Broward County Sheriff's Office, and a cooperative Dvorko confessed everything.
So he spills the beans.
As proof, he led Ilaraza to Bobby Kent's body. Once Bobby had been found, the conspirators quickly cracked and began giving excuses as to why he had to die, why Bobby had to die.
Which is basically, they're talking about the abuse.
They claimed they were merely bystanders to what they had thought was going to be a simple beating. Some claimed they knew nothing about any murder. The prosecutors dealt with this by trying each of the 7 defendants separately.
I'm curious. Do you think, I mean, obviously, we're going to find out that actually worked, but why do you think they'd want to do it separately? Because you think that way they could pin them down to get one to turn against the other?
I'm not really sure, actually.
Yeah, I don't know why they wouldn't want to try. Have you ever seen a case where they tried them all together?
No.
I'm curious, yeah.
That's actually more along the lines of the norm would be to try them all separately.
Okay. But I mean, I just figured if you threaten them that before when the charges are filed, you threaten them, then of course they talk.
Right.
But they've already got Dvorko spilling the beans on the Pizza Hut plan anyway.
Right.
He kind of told the whole story. I think he's the only one that stuck with his story the whole time.
Right.
So Marty Puccio, the so-called best friend of Bobby Kent, the victim, who himself had been victimized by Bobby for years, received the harshest sentence. Now, charged with first-degree murder, he was sentenced to death in the electric chair on August 3rd of 1995. But in 1997, the Florida Supreme Court overturned his death sentence and commuted it to life with parole eligibility in 25 years. He is serving his time at the DeSoto Annex in Arcadia, where he's reportedly gone into prison ministry. Of course, he's found Jesus.
Of course, they always do. Derek Kaufman, the 22-year-old who had told the younger crowd he was in the mafia in order to impress them, and who showed up for the murder party with a bat instead of a promised gun, was sentenced to life plus 30 years. He is serving his time at the Gulf Correctional Institute in Weeki Wachee, where he has incurred nearly 20 infractions, including drug use and disobeying orders.
So he's just been kind of a shit.
A shithead, yeah.
Well, as it was Donald Simonek's 18th birthday on the day he helped kill Bobby Kent, and having delivered the blow that started the frenzy, remember he stabbed him in the neck first. He started the first blow. He was sentenced to life plus 15 years. And he is serving his sentence like Derek Kaufman at the Gulf Correctional Institute in Weewahitchka.
Weewahitchka. That's what I meant a minute ago.
What'd you say?
I think I said Weeki Wachee.
Weeki Wachee. That's like a springs or a park or something.
Well, it is a town. It's a town in Florida.
Yeah, but
there's a lot of weird named towns in Florida.
You know, that is true. We have run across quite a few of those. But I can assure you there's no prison in Weeki Wachee.
Okay. Weewahitchka.
I'm pretty sure. That's where the underwater mermaids are, I think.
Underwater mermaids. Are there above water mermaids?
Now you're just being smart. Anyway, so like Kaufman, Donald Simonek has racked up an impressive count of infractions. Some 20 of them to speak of, ranging from weapons possessions to drug and alcohol use. So now the hitman is doing some abusive stuff and doing some drugs, while Donald Simonek, who's kind of just he actually had just turned 18. Now he's really the hitman because he's got the gun.
Okay.
Whatever. I don't know.
He probably just had like a shank or something.
Yeah, you know, the thing is I feel bad for Donald Simonek in the aspect.
I don't.
I do only in the aspect, hear me out, only in the aspect that the only reason he was involved is because he began dating Allie Willis, and she had said that Bobby had raped her. And so, of course, with that being said, he's like, well, I'm going to get back at this guy for that. He's young enough and impressionable enough because remember, he was 17. Remember, she was, I think at one point in her life, she was working the streets.
I don't know.
Yeah, she was working the streets. So she was a more seasoned, because she was actually working for an escort service. So
she was only 17.
Well, I'm just trying to explain to you something.
Okay.
You can Google it. You can look it up, do the research.
Okay.
So she's kind of more seasoned. She gets a hold of this guy, and she kind of convinces him that this is what happened. And I'm not saying that he's not guilty in any way, shape, or form. He started the whole thing because he's the one that really jumped and started the whole progression of what happened to Bobby. But I feel terrible. But here he is in prison with weapons charges, drug and alcohol charges in prison. So maybe did we get the guy off the streets and save some more lives?
Maybe. Who
knows? So I don't like the scenario with him because he kind of got it brought into this, kind of like Heather Swallers. She kind of got drug into this as well.
Well, Derek DeVerco was charged with second-degree murder and originally sentenced to 7 years on May 12, 1995, but received an additional 4 years on his sentence for his attempt to lie on the witness stand after his initial sentencing while testifying against the others.
Wait, what?
So he was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but then he lied on the witness stand when he was testifying against the others.
Because he had turned state's evidence?
Yes. He testified against the others, but he lied, so he received an additional 4 years in prison.
Okay.
He was paroled on October 1st, 1999, after serving 4 years, and left Florida for Missouri, where he now works as a truck driver.
So he's already out of prison.
Yes, he's out.
So he really didn't serve all of his
years.
11 years that he was got. Okay. Well, I do know that Lisa Connolly was initially sentenced to life in prison, and she wasn't given the possibility of parole. But then her sentence was overturned on her appeal as unduly and harsh and was reduced in 1998 to 22 years. Somehow she was released in February of 2004. So I get confused on the sentencing when you look at some of these, but that's the justice system for you.
Right.
Now, she gave birth to her daughter.
This is the justice system that just let Bill Cosby out of prison.
Yeah. That's not a Florida case. That's not our episode.
Well, I'm just saying.
Not our state.
I'm just pointing out how flawed the system is.
It's very flawed in a lot of different ways. And in this way, you have Lisa Connolly, who we know
was the mastermind.
The mastermind of this whole plan. And so she's given life without the possibility of parole. But then she goes to appeal and they say, okay, look, you're going to get 22 years. But you know what? Hey, just go ahead and be out in 2004. It's ridiculous. But remember, she was pregnant. So she was pregnant and she gave birth to her daughter while she was in prison. And there was some confusion there. And this is where the confusion is, because there was some confusion thinking that it might have been Bobby Kent's baby, because we find out later that she was, or possibly was, raped by Bobby Kent. So there was some speculation that it might be Bobby's baby, but they're pretty certain it's Marty's.
Yeah.
So right around that time, something happened there. I think that sort of progressed her to hate Bobby so much.
I think at this point we know that it was Marty's baby.
Exactly. But, I think we do know at this point, but I'm saying there was some speculation at the time.
Yeah.
She gave birth to the baby while she was incarcerated, and she's now, as reported, is living in Pennsylvania with her daughter that she gave birth to in prison and her younger son. She has kept a low profile since her release, and she runs a cleaning business, and she's trying to become, or has become, I guess, rather by now, a certified optician.
Well, Allie Willis was charged with second-degree murder and sentenced to 40 years imprisonment and 40 years probation on May 19, 1995. The sentence was reduced on appeal to 17 years, but she was released in September of 2001.
Bill Cosby style.
But remains on probation until September 15th of 2041. So she's still on probation now.
So the mastermind gets out of prison with no strings attached.
Yes.
Allie Willis, who was just dating the guy and kind of got this whole thing.
I know, it's all fucked up.
And it's all over the place. And that's,
I know.
Even trying to do some of this, me and Lauren are kind of over the place. We talked about earlier, this was kind of a weird case to begin with. And of course, I don't want to say it the wrong way, but the crack addict, Heather Swallers, who was just there because there were drugs involved, she was charged with second-degree murder and sentenced to 7 years. And when she took the stand on May 17th of 1995, she did not follow Dvorko's lead and lie, and in fact, she turned state's evidence. So she pretty much told it like it was.
Yeah.
As the best of her ability.
She was paroled on February 14th of 1998 after serving almost 3 years. She was the first to be released from custody, and she reportedly resides in Georgia with her children.
She probably had the least amount to do with anything.
Right.
The only thing that really got her involved was the fact that she was told to go down and say, hey, are there alligators down there?
I know.
That's really her only involvement. And I think she did it, again, because there were drugs present and she was addicted. And if you got an addictive personality and there's stuff available, you're there.
Well, in 1998, Jim Schultz wrote a book on the case called Bully, a true story of high school revenge. 3 years later, the book was adapted into a film by Larry Clark, also called Bully, which starred Brad Renfro as Marty Puccio and Nick Stahl as Bobby Kent.
Which makes sure that if you're going to watch, don't have children around.
In a later interview, Allie Willis stated that the murder scene in the movie was actually very accurate. This case is hard to wrap my head around. I mean, it's pretty straightforward at a glance, but when you look deeper at the why of it all, it brings about so many questions. Like, why didn't Allie Willis and Lisa Connolly, who both claimed that they were raped by Bobby Kent, go to the police? Why did Marty Puccio stay in this crazy abusive friendship for so long and never reach out for help from his family or other friends or authorities? He'd been abused by Bobby Kent for more than half of his life at this point, at the point of the murder.
And by abuse, I mean, it was pretty aggressive abuse.
I mean, like, he was beaten, and as we said earlier,
hit,
sexually abused,
attacked by the dogs. I mean, this was pretty rough. And actually, there was in a newspaper back in October 24th, the Miami Herald, October 24th of 1993, the Miami Herald actually wrote a long series. It's called "What is Happening to Our Children?" And in this article, it's a long series. I mean, it's like there's 14 pages and there's different pieces of it. But in one part, it says, in early July, Lisa asked Marty if he thought there was something wrong with Bobby. He reminded her of the husband in the movie Sleeping with the Enemy, a fastidious psycho who abused Julia Roberts over small failings like leaving bathroom towels askew. Marty said Bobby frightened him too, knocking her around over stupid things for years. He had been running his life ever since they were little kids. He said Bobby threatened to kill him if he ever stopped being his friend. So this is written in this newspaper article and it's long. You can look it up. It's called, like I said, October 24th, 1993 in the Miami Herald. And it's called What is Happening to Our Children. And actually, it's subtitled, Caution, Growing Up in the 90s may be hazardous to your health.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, so you can read the article. It's actually pretty in depth because it's at the time all this is going on. There's some interview with some of the characters involved in this.
So, why did these other teens, Heather Swallows, Derek DeVarco, Donald Semenek, and Derek Kaufman, who had never even met Bobby Kent and had no connection to him at all, agree to participate in this murder? Like, there's so much stuff that just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, nothing in this case makes sense. This is a pretty heinous crime. I mean, at the time, this was brutal. If you look at the crime scene photos, it's pretty rough. I mean, let's go right here. Okay, the wounds that were on Bobby Kent. You had a 1-inch stab wound to the right side of the neck. Okay, I believe this was in the back of the neck. This was the first wound that happened. Now, obviously, it wasn't fatal wound. That was Donald Semenek, his first impact with a knife. He hits him in the back of the neck. There was a 3-inch wound to the upper right abdomen. This almost punched through the back. Almost punched right through his back. Think about that.
Yeah.
It's a 3-inch wound, so that he jams it in there so hard. Now, there was another fatal wound. Now, the fatal wound that they said, I guess, was to the heart muscle. This actually pierced 3 chambers of the heart, and it went through the lung, and it was a 2-inch laceration. So, I mean, you're talking about they stab, and then they kind of like jam it down. So this like a violent punch. And I think this was the one that they said that Marty Puccio delivered. So they believe Marty Puccio delivered this punch to the heart, which pretty much was the fatal wound. And then obviously the swing with the bat. So you got the swing with the bat, hits him across the head. And I believe that was a 2-inch laceration right to the skull. And then you had 2 sawing knife wounds. One was 4-inch and one was 5-inch across the front of the neck. So we're not talking about they beat Bobby Kent. They went after Bobby with a lot of vicious hate. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm.
They went after him with vicious hate. If you look at those wounds, I mean, and again, they
it was
punched
like
him.
A slaughter.
Exactly. So I mean, and he was bleeding profusely. I mean, you have a wound to the neck. So you have a wound to the back of the neck, 2 wounds to the front of the neck, a bat that hit you in the head. You got hit in the heart, and you got hit. I can't imagine the fear was going through him. Now, I understand that maybe he was abusive and all that, but does this warrant that type of revenge? This actually brings me back to our Crash and Murder episode. I believe it was episode 2, which, by the way, is still one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah, that was way back in the day.
That was way back in the day. But the thing is that was on our radar instantly. We had like 5 cases we really wanted to do when we started this podcast, and that was definitely one of them. So, like I said, Crash and Murder, episode 2, it was one of our first. This was when 26-year-old Lenny Martis crashed his car through the front window of his estranged wife's apartment and shot her and her lover. Now, during the episode, we dived into the actual developmental part of the brain.
Right. So, we're going to talk about how the brain develops here, because this actually plays in. According to an article on the website for the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry titled Teen Brain Behavior, Problem Solving, and Decision Making, scientists have identified a specific region of the brain called the amygdala that is responsible for immediate reactions, including fear and aggressive behavior. This region develops early. However, the frontal cortex, the area of the brain that controls reasoning and helps us think before we act, develops later. This part of the brain is still changing and maturing well into adulthood. And I think in Crash and Murder, we talked about that it's not fully developed until someone's between 26 and 28 years old. Pictures of the brain in action show that adolescents' brains work differently than adults when they make decisions or solve problems. Their actions are guided more by the emotional and reactive amygdala and less by the thoughtful, logical frontal cortex. Research has also shown that exposure to drugs and alcohol during the teen years can change or delay these developments. Based on the stage of their brain development, adolescents are more likely to act on impulse, misread or misinterpret social cues and emotions, get into accidents of all kinds, get involved in fights, engage in dangerous or risky behavior. And adolescents are less likely to think before they act, pause to consider consequences of their actions, or change their dangerous or inappropriate behaviors. So these brain differences don't mean that young people can't make good decisions or tell the difference between right and wrong. It also doesn't mean that they shouldn't be held responsible for their actions. That's important information for attorneys and judges to consider as they work with children in the legal system. And I want to look specifically at Marty Puccio and if he was possibly a victim of, quote, battered person syndrome, which unfortunately for Marty was not something accepted into law as a legal defense until 1999.
Is that what they call it, battered person syndrome?
Yeah, a lot of people mistakenly call it battered women syndrome. And if you say battered woman syndrome, people will more likely recognize it, but it's actually battered person syndrome because it's not just women that are abused.
Exactly.
So Weand versus State was a landmark Florida Supreme Court case that took place in March of 1999. Now, in this historic case, the state Supreme Court granted Florida citizens the ability to rely upon battered spouse syndrome as a defense for killing their abuser. While the decision is effective for anyone who is in an abusive situation. It's not just a spouse. It's not just a woman. It's anyone who's in an abusive situation. The majority of people who would take advantage of this defense are women, since they are generally abused more than men. Kathleen Weand shot and killed her husband, Todd. She used the battered woman syndrome in her defense, and the defense expert agreed that she was suffering from the syndrome. However, the jury shot down her defense, and Kathleen was sentenced to 18 years in prison for second-degree murder. Now, Kathleen appealed and made it all the way to Florida Supreme Court, who regarded her case as high priority. So I find myself a little surprised that this issue has not come up in the case of Marty Puccio.
It is odd.
While there's no real excuse for murder, should he have been initially sentenced to death, being that he was the victim of systematic abuse at the hands of Bobby Kent for years?
Well, if you're going to testify to that, wouldn't you necessarily have to have some sort of proof, though?
I guess. Well, what kind of proof is needed? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, I'm just saying that you would have to, I think you would have to prove that you were battered.
Well, in a Stetson Law Review titled School Shooters, Perpetrators, or Victims, this case, the murder of Bobby Kent, was specifically brought up, and it stated, an example of severe physical bullying is depicted in Bully, A True Story of High School Revenge, a book based on true events that recounts the story of Bobby Kent, a high school student in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, who bullied others physically and psychologically. In one instance, Kent was upset with his best friend Marty Puccio for leaving a loaf of bread on the kitchen counter, and he shoved Marty into his room where he beat him for half an hour. When the two emerged from the room, Marty's mouth was puffy and caked with blood, and his right eye was already closing around a nasty blue bruise. An example of how physical bullying can escalate and breed more violence, a group of Kent's peers, including Puccio, eventually beat and stabbed Kent to death. Yet the article does not state whether the bullying could be considered a mitigating factor in the murder. At least it's talked about. Now, we've talked many times on this podcast, we've talked about aggravating and mitigating factors when it comes to sentencing. I think that the bullying should have been a mitigating factor for Marty Puccio in his trial. And I don't think he should have initially... Well, it should
for his appeal, because that wasn't a factor during his trial.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So, in an article in the LegalMatch.com Law Library, battered person syndrome is discussed as a legal defense and mitigating factor. Mm-hmm. The most common use of battered person syndrome is as a complete defense to a crime against the abuser or as mitigation. Mitigation does not prevent the defendant from being found guilty, but after being found guilty, a battered person may be able to use the abuse as mitigation in sentencing, which is basically exactly what I just said. Mm-hmm. The fact that the defendant was a victim of ongoing violence may reduce the punishment. There are two main ways to establish a defense for a battered criminal defendant. The first is the use of self-defense if the defendant was defending themselves from another act of violence by the abuser. The second is using the battered person syndrome to explain why the defendant committed the crime and why the defendant saw no other option to escaping the abuse other than committing the crime.
So my question would be, if this murder had happened today, do you think Marty Puccio, who remember was sentenced to death at first, would have been able to use the years of abuse and bullying as a defense, or at least a mitigating factor?
That's what I was saying. I think that the laws have changed a lot since 1995 when they went to trial. And if this were to happen today, that the years of abuse could be used as a defense, or at the very least, a mitigating factor when it came to his sentencing. I do not think he should have been sentenced to death.
It is a murder, though. That's.
I understand that.
Okay, it's a murder. I guess, and like I said,
now let me, quick story time.
Okay.
Real quick. So, in my early days as a paralegal, my very first law job was working at the clerk's office in the courthouse. I worked at the clerk's office. And there was sort of a higher profile case that was going on, a trial that was happening while I worked there. And it was a woman. She did not kill her husband, but she shot him. And she was using the battered spouse's syndrome as a defense. And it was sort of high profile. And I had the opportunity to actually sit in and watch her testimony. It was such a big deal that literally everybody got an email like, she's taking the stand. Everybody took their lunch break at that moment. And everybody piled into the courtroom to listen to her take the stand in her defense. And she was actually found not guilty by reason of battered spouse syndrome. So I've had the opportunity to watch a trial and watch how this works.
And witness that particular defense.
Yes. So that's why I feel like, now this was back in, I want to say 2006, 2007 maybe.
Well, I can see why this defense would not be eligible to be used at the time of his trial, because it hadn't really been put into effect yet.
Right. So the
but
question
during the
is,
appeal,
if this were to happen, his appeal.
But during his appeal, was he able to use this? Because he did get it reduced from death to life, right?
Yes.
Was this the reasoning?
I am not sure, but I do not think so.
Okay.
So what I would really like to hear from our listeners, after everything we've said, what do you think about this case? And do you think that this sentences would be different now versus 1994, 95? What I mean, like,
so what you're
I
saying
really
is,
want like open discussion because I find this to be super interesting.
So you're saying is you want our listeners to let us know
what their thoughts are.
If this case were to happen right now, how would it be, and how would it be different?
Right.
So in other words, what do they think would have transpired, and how would it be different? I like that. That's kind of let's call it, what did they call it? A call to action.
Yeah.
Right? Let's hit us up.
Hit us up.
Get involved.
Email, social media. Let's discuss it.
Yeah, exactly. So do a little research on this case or listen to the podcast a couple times and let us know what your feelings are, your thoughts are for this case versus 1994. I like that. So hit us up.
All right.
So I guess that's going to be the case tonight of Bobby Kent, Marty Puccio, and as I'm going to list them as the Gangsters of 7.
The Gangsters of 7.
The Pizza Hut Gang. The Pizza Hut Gang.
It's not funny.
It's not funny, but unfortunately, we've done so many episodes because remember, we just broke 100 episodes.
We did. And we didn't even make a big deal of it, but we did.
We did. We broke 100 episodes. But we have our listeners to thank for it. But we've listened to a lot of podcasts. I mean, so when you're really involved in the true crime, you have to have some sort of like that humorous background a little bit, something to just kind of take that edge off a little bit to kind of keep you level.
Right.
So with that being said, the Pizza Hut Gang committed this crime, and we really want to know what your thoughts are and how you think that this would go today if it were to go to trial today based on all the circumstances we gave you originally. Is there anything else you want to add to this particular case, Lauren? That's it?
Nope.
All right. Well, I guess in that case, this is going to be it for tonight.
If you'd like to support the show, please remember, subscribe to our Patreon. Check out our website for links to all of our social media, Patreon, merch store, and more. Make sure to subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening and rate and review. This really helps us branch out and reach a wider audience.
And as always, thanks for listening
to Paradise After Dark.
Dark.